Welcome to the session on Pidyon Shavuyim and the hostage issue. As I know you all must certainly be, I was deeply affected, I should say shaken by the yesterday morning's heartrending accounts of suffering by the hostages and the families of those still held hostage by Hamas. I understand that Jewish teaching calls captivity worse than death, and really makes the redemption of captives, Pidyon Shavuyim, forgive my pronunciation in Hebrew, but makes that the highest commandment. And I have, over the years, read the teachings in the Talmud and Maimonides and others, and it's fascinating to see that the dilemma in negotiating for hostages and the issues remain the same after hundreds, even thousands of years. I also want to, we're going to continue that discussion today, but first, it's going to be a follow-on, really, to the dialogue that Ambassador Roger Carstens and Lior Lotan had yesterday, and I do sincerely want to compliment them both on what was a superb exchange of ideas and thoughts, and beyond that, really to thank them for their determined optimism. I mean, in these dark circumstances, I mean, they're just extraordinary optimism that we will find a way through this. Gives us a ray of hope that we still can bring back more of those still held. But we're going to continue it with a larger group of people, as you see here, and a group of experienced practitioners. Enslavement for monetary, holding hostages for monetary or political ransom has been going, as I say, for millennia. This is not a new thing. And that thought alone is humbling, really, I think, to the notion that we can find easy solutions to end this problem and even to resolve the individual episodes. But we're gonna talk about that today. Contemporary terrorists have really utilized the tactic of hostage-taking from the 1960s on in a variety of forms: airline hijackings, kidnappings, barricade and hostage situations, mass abductions as a means of coercion, as shields to cause crises for societies and governments. And these are, it is unfortunately a powerful tool. It works. We're going to try to examine some of the developments that we've seen in these tactics, some of the innovations that we've seen in recent years. And really that is a lead-up, of course, to the current situation in Gaza, which will be our main focus on that. I do want to forewarn the audience that you will hear an array of opinions. expressions, of candid expressions of opinions on this, and no doubt some debate. And in a sense, that is not because we want to cause any anguish or because we have any political agenda. That is inherent in these situations. There is risk. Whatever is done carries risk. And if I go back to the terms that were expressed in Pidyon Shavuyim, in the redemption of captives, really the risk is between the danger posed by leaving an unvanquished foe in the field versus the danger to society caused by the continuing captivity itself. And that's it in stark terms. And of course, coming to Israel as an outsider and trying to keep up with its events from a distance, I mean, I can really see on Saturday nights and the divisions, the anguish that this causes. So, with that, to discuss these difficult issues, really the ICT has given me a stunning panel of experts. I mean, what we have here represents probably something close to 2 centuries of experience in dealing with these issues. Ariel and I alone, we count for one of those centuries. So we have Gershon Baskin, who, as I'm sure all of you know, played a key role in the negotiations for Gilad Shalit, and has continued to be an important commentator and play a role in these issues. We have my dear friend Ambassador Roger Carstens from, it was 2020, wasn't it? 2020, from 2020 to 2025, earlier this year. He served as the special president's envoy for hostage affairs, and in that capacity, really, has handled a record number of cases of hostage negotiations and wrongful detention negotiations, and brought back a record number of Americans, and so we recognize that. We have Colonel Avi Kalo, who was the head of the IDF's Department of Prisoners, Missing Persons, and Hostages, and had responsibility for that. We have another dear friend of mine. I'm doing it alphabetically, by the way. That's the safest. Ariel Merari. Ariel actually, many years ago, it's in I believe, as I recall, in the late 1970s, you created the hostage negotiations and crisis management unit, which was really, I mean, he was a pioneer in this area, the first institutionalization of tactics and institutional memory on this. And we have Dr. Shaul Shay, who has been the deputy head of the NSC the author of three books on hostage situations. In fact, I have two of them. I discovered I'm missing the third, which you'll have to sign for me. So he is going to be addressing those issues. The format that we're following is a mixed format. Some of the members felt comfortable, just wanted to go with a question and answer format. Ariel and Shaul Shay wanted, and because it works this way in terms of, because I know what they're going to talk about, I have a rough idea what they're going to say. It makes sense for really us to give them 10, 15 minutes, absolutely no more than that, to give a full exposition of a ordered process, and then we'll go back to a question and answer format. Actually, I suspect by that time we will be setting off a debate that will take us through the end of the session, and it will simply be my role at that time to watch the clock, and you all can have at it. With that, let me begin with a particular question, and that is, I'll begin with you, Roger. Since you finished up yesterday, I'll make you the starter this morning on this. Now we're not going alphabetical. Look, hostage incidents are, as we've learned in the United States, are politically dangerous for presidents, for prime ministers too. In our case, the Iranian hostage crisis probably destroyed the chances of President Carter for re-election. And so they regard these as both dangerous. At the same time, presidents love to bring back hostages and bask in that credit. As I mentioned earlier, Roger, you handled a record number of cases, and you brought back a record number of hostages. So you made presidents happy. More importantly, you made the country happy. To what do you owe the success that you've had in bringing him back? What explains it?
Hey, Brian, thanks for that question. What an honor to be on the stage with you, the one person who's been writing about this topic and cataloging it since the early 1970s. We've had a great friendship as I've had this job because, to an extent, you start off tabula rasa. You have to figure a lot of these cases out from scratch. And being able to rely on people like Brian and some of the writings and some of the conversations I've had with the very people on this stage, my distinguished colleagues, help me to, at times, come up with the idea or come up with maybe a process that might give us success. But to answer your question, what gave me success, I'm going to throw a few things at you that may surprise you. Number one, I am an optimist, but I also believe that things are out there. And whether you believe in God, karma, good luck, I would say is the logos of Heraclitus. There might be something out there that might show you favor, and I would often go into a negotiation praying for the very people that I was going to negotiate with and say, Lord, I'm about to talk to a dictator. Please move his heart so that I get someone back. Because at the end of the day, my good looks and charisma and the words that come out of my mouth, and let's be honest, I'm pretty good looking, but the good looks and charisma that come out of my body are not going to get the job done. I'm trying to move the heart of a dictator, and I'm not sure I'm smart enough to get it done. So I would rely on a higher power to give me at least some advantage. Now, if there is no higher power, at least I've walked in with a little extra confidence that something's going to happen in this room that's going to be good. Number two, I always did my mathematics up front. And by the way, I won't talk forever, I promise. I did everything I could to find out who I was going to be negotiating with so that I had understanding on what levers I might be able to pull to get the job done. But the second I walked in that room, I might allow the first thing that comes out of my mouth to be planned. But after that first thing comes out and the other side starts to negotiate with you, I tried to hit a switch and go full on intuition. And I often likened it to a boxing match or a wrestling match. You get to take your first punch, and after that, the match is on. You really can't predict what your third, fourth, fifth, and sixth moves are going to be. And it's the same in wrestling. And I thought that's how this goes. I can go in and tell President Maduro, we're going to do this. And then after that, the race is on. And I was constantly shocked by what would happen in these negotiations. And by trying to read the room, feel what was happening, that gave me more success than whether I would have kept looking at my notebook and going down a checklist of how you conduct a negotiation under high pressure. The other thing that I would say is that in dealing with the other side, I try to listen to them. You'll find that everyone wants to be heard, to include the people that take our citizens. They feel like they must be, in a way, maybe not validated, but listened to, and in doing so, you establish this relationship and this modicum of respect. On my side, I tried, I feel like the mic went off, it doesn't matter, I'm super loud anyway. On my side, I tried to be transparent and honest and recognize that the other side might not want to be. So when I showed up, I said, here's who I am, here's what I'm going to try to do, here's my offer. And by deciding not to play games over a period of years, they started to, in a way, trust what was going to come out of my mouth. And I think that gave me benefit as we started to get closer to winding down these negotiations. But in being transparent, listening to the other side, and trying to go in with an open mind and really engage and build trust, I probably succeeded most successfully with people in Washington, D.C. Because at the end of the day, the easiest conversations I ever had, it was talking to the dictator or the terrorist group or the person that took our citizen hostage. The most difficult thing I ever did was try to convince people in Washington, D.C. to align with me. And I often said I've been to 5 wars, maybe 5.5 if you count this one that was kind of squirrely. But I've been to 5.5 wars, and the most combat I ever saw in my entire life was wearing a suit and tie in Washington, D.C., trying to get people in the White House, the State Department, my own department, the CIA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, to align and agree with a strategy to try to bring someone home. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, it was never about me, and I never brought one person home. Check it out, I never brought one person home. A huge team of people, often get over 1,000 people, they're the people that brought them all back. There were people from the US government, nonprofits, the private sector, congressmen, senators, importantly, the family members of those that were being held. It's a team sport, it's a team effort, and Roger Carstens never brought one person home, but I was honored to be a part of a team that together were able to get the result that the president wanted. How's that for a 7-minute answer to a very simple question?
All right, thank you. Avi Kalo, I mean, you headed the IDF's, as I said, POW, MIA, and hostage unit. When I read the papers, and I will tell you that I read them daily, whether Jerusalem Post, Reds, when I'm in California, in looking at who handles hostage incidents, I sometimes get a little bit confused. I mean, we heard earlier today from Gal Hirsch, and so he's in the Prime Minister's office. We saw that David Barnea was appointed to lead the negotiations with Hamas on this issue. I think General Alon also played a role. Help me out here. And so what is the structure that Israel has created to deal with this issue? And did that change fundamentally for the current case, the Hamas case?
Well, Brian, thanks for the opportunity, and that's a great That's a great question. I would say that the outcome of the Israeli establishment when it comes to the MIA's issue, the hostages issue, is transparent, and it moves quite an evolution during the, I would say, 3 to 4 decades that we have some incidents, quite massive, I must say, because the Israeli obviously confronting this issue almost permanently in different arenas. So along the times there was kind of an evolution. I will skip the 80s, but I'll say about the 90s. It's okay? Yeah, okay. So we had kind of a flagship case in Israel that was Ron Arad, the navigator from the Israeli Air Force who fell in Lebanon and been in captivity in 1986, and ever since then we haven't found him up until today. But that was, and there is here Ori Slonim, who was one of the leading MIA's, I would say, policymakers in Israel late in the 80s, who very close, familiar with the case. But this case was so heavily been traumatic by the establishment that the late Prime Minister Rabin has decided in 1994 to establish an MIA department in different organizations, in the Mossad, in the ISA, Shabak, Shin Bet, and in the intelligence corps of the IDF. And during those times, it's really been getting into a process where it became a genuine effort dealing with intelligence on one hand, with negotiation on the other hand, and with obviously advising the blue side, which is obviously the Israeli government, following what Rogers have said here, about the complexities and the delegates' relations between political level and professional level, which I have the opportunity to express in a few different incidents. Anyway, back there in 1994, Prime Minister has set the, I would say, rules of engagement for the community intelligence to move forward. And only 6-7 years later, actually, it's been getting more operational in its structure, where actually some, I would say, envoys to the MIAs, which is quite equivalent to what Roger has done, has been nominated, and the team as a whole has started to work together and brought some successes in the negotiation vis-a-vis Hezbollah in 2004, where we brought back 3 missing soldiers from Lebanon and another civilian, former colonel in the IDF, Elchanan Tenenbaum, who was held in captivity of Hezbollah, and later on in different other incidents or negotiations that we had with Hezbollah in 2006-8, after the second Lebanon war, and afterwards the Gilad Shalit deal, which Gershon here can explain and tell us more than anyone else about it. The latter one was after the last operation, the military campaign in Gaza in 2014, where we had this team running for failed negotiation with Hamas due to political directive that are not pushing for any resolvement of this issue as part of the, I would say, the general conspiracy understanding that we can contain Hamas, and Hamas is deterred from fighting Israel. Obviously, we meet this episode very tragically on October 7th at the end. Now, you've asked, Brian, and I will conclude with that for now. You've asked about what happened after October 7th with the establishment. Well, that was obviously a fundamental focal point for us, because the traumatic area and the traumatic event and the mass of hostages and the trauma generally we have in the public obviously changed the structure. The IDF has established a full administrative role for a function headed by a general, and Nitzan Alon, retired, that is leading now, ever since October 7th, the effort from the IDF side, and he is actually setting the tone for the professional establishment with regard to the hostages. But on the other hand, some other things happened. First of all, I would say the tensions, which is obviously natural, but the tension between political level and professional level has been skyrocketing to a level that we haven't seen before. And that's obviously impacting, first, the dynamics within the system itself, the ecosystem between the establishment and political level. And second, obviously, that impacts most badly the negotiation itself. And we do see it up until those days, I must say. Second of all, the other bad impact that happened is that most of the, I would say, knowledge that is handheld by senior officials in the IDF and in the professional establishment in other organizations as well, has been actually erased and wasn't a part of the negotiating team currently in those days. And that's also impacted some of the ways that the negotiation team or the professional level can impact the political level. Once you don't have those people within the establishment that does not can, for example, challenge the the political level can suggest different angles for discussion, then you're losing ground as the establishment itself losing ground in front of the political level. So currently the situation is not that stable when it comes to the evolution. Obviously, once the war is done, and obviously we'll, hopefully we'll get all hostages back home, then I guess we'll see some new, I would say, stabilization of the situation. But currently it's pretty hectic situation.
Think you understand, and yet, I mean, despite the structures that you have created,
I haven't created structure.
No, not you have created. I mean, Israel has created. Gersh, you ended up playing a critical role as a back channel and in dealing with the Gilad Shalit case. How did you come to be involved in that?
First of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I've been speaking with Hamas for 19 years. I have spent more hours talking to Hamas than I think any other Israeli alive who's not part of the prison service or the Shin Bet. I am currently in contact with 8 members of the Hamas leadership. I started because I've been involved in Israeli-Palestinian relations work for 50 years. In 2005, I met the first person I ever spoke to from Hamas. This was at a World Bank conference in Cairo, where I was the only Israeli there, and a colleague from Gaza, who's not from Hamas, who taught at the El-Azhar University in Gaza, the Fatah University, came up to me with a colleague of his from Hamas and said, Gershon, I want you to meet my colleague who teaches at the Islamic University, teaches economics, and he's from Hamas. And he came to Cairo because he never met a Jew before, he never met an Israeli, and he wanted to. We spent about 6 hours over the next 2 days talking. We didn't agree on anything, but it was a really interesting talk. And at the end of our conference, I suggested to him that we create a dialogue group. In the end, the dialogue group didn't go through because Hamas vetoed it, the leadership outside. But in the creation of the opportunity for a dialogue group, I not only found 4 countries that were willing to sponsor us, but I also went to Gaza twice to meet with his colleagues at the Islamic University. And with him, we went to the Hamas Prime Minister's office. And that was a scene when I had to give them my Israeli ID to enter the Prime Minister's office, and spent 2 hours talking with one of the founders of Hamas, one of the advisors to Ismail Haniyeh, Ahmed Youssef, who said at the end of the 2 hours that he would join the group. But again, that never happened. A few months later, in September 2005, Hamas kidnapped and murdered one of my wife's first cousins, Sasson Noriel. When he disappeared, the family had asked me to use my contacts with Palestinians to see if I could find him. I tried and failed, and a few days later, Hamas issued a video with my wife's cousin who had been tortured. He was an Iraqi Jew, he spoke fluent Arabic, and he spelled out what Hamas wanted for his life. A few days later, the Israelis found his body on the side of a road in the West Bank. He was butchered with a butcher's knife. Apparently, they understood that the Shin Bet was on their tails, and they decided to kill him. Standing over his grave in Jerusalem, and more than 1,000 people came to his funeral, I swore to myself that if ever again something like this happens, I'll do everything humanly possible. Sasson is with me every single day since 2005. When Gilad Shalit was abducted, a week later, the professor from Gaza called me and said, Gershon, we have to do something. I said, what can we do? He said, let's open up a channel of communication. He went to the Hamas Prime Minister's office. They called me and asked to speak to the father of the soldier. I'm sitting in my kitchen with my 2 pre-army sons, looking at them, thinking about them being abducted by Hamas, and one of the Hamas leaders is talking about a conversation with the father of the soldier. I arranged that conversation later that day between Noam Shalit, Zichrono Livracha, and it was with Dr. Azi Hamad, who was the spokesperson of the Hamas government at the time. The next day, Noam and Aviva Shalit came to Jerusalem. I met them for the first time, and I told them that I would be with them every day until Gilad Shalit comes home. 2.5 months later, I brought a handwritten letter from Gilad Shalit proving that he was alive, but more importantly, proving that we had a channel of communication that led to the people holding him. It took another 5 years before the officials in the Department for Missing in Action decided to engage me, and that was David Meidan from the Mossad at the time, who came into the job during Chol Hamoed Pesach in 2011 and had nothing, no contacts, no mediators, no open door. And I contacted him on the day that he was appointed. He said, give me a couple of weeks to read the file. He didn't even know where he was going to be sitting. A couple of weeks later, I called him, we met, and I started delivering messages back and forth between Hamas and Israel. That led to a series which is documented in a book that I wrote also, thanks to Ofra Dekel, who was the first guy holding the position of responsibility for the Missing in Action, who told me to document everything that I do, so I did. But more importantly, I have built a relationship with Hamas people over the years in exactly the way that Roger said, through honesty and transparency, obviously not holding the same positions that they do, but listening very carefully to them, which is why in the first week after October 7th, I had a Zoom with about 50 families of hostages who were, of course, panicking, didn't know what to do, and in an hour conversation with them at the end, I told them two things that I want you to remember. The first is, don't listen to the establishment when they tell you to be quiet, because they will. They'll tell you to be quiet, they'll tell you not to talk. I said to them, tell their names, tell their stories, put out their pictures. Everyone has to know every single one of those hostages. Being quiet is not going to help them. And the second thing I said to them is, at the end of the day, you are going to be facing the government of Israel. They're the ones who are going to decide whether or not your loved ones are coming home. And that's our situation until today. In my estimation, my last sentence, right now, as we stand at this moment, there is one person in the world who can bring the hostages home. That's Donald Trump. Because he is the only person in the world who can tell Prime Minister Netanyahu to make the deal that's been on the table for a long time. In September of last year, when I presented to the Americans, the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Israeli government, Hamas was in September of last year willing to release all the hostages within a 3-week period of time on the condition that the war ends. And that was at a time when the bad deal of Biden was on the table. I called it a bad deal the moment it was presented, because it had a million exit points, and it didn't bring all the hostages home and didn't end the war. We are at a point now, and we know this, on Monday night, when the Americans gave the Qataris the final version of the Trump proposal, and the Qataris were sitting with the Hamas team, when I got a phone call from Washington saying that this is happening now, we expect an answer from Hamas tomorrow that Doha was bombed.
All right. So, I mean, that's a riveting story. We're moving into Hamas a little bit faster than I wanted, but one of the issues that has come out here clearly is that there are the people holding the hostages, they're one set of adversaries, and then the complex political situations, organizational issues, communications matters on the home front also represent can represent an enormous obstacle to these cases. Let me back. Shaul, would it be appropriate for you to talk about your comments now? Because I want to back up and go a little bit into looking at it from the evolution of the tactics and organization, kind of how we got to where we are. So the floor is yours, Shaul.
Okay, so I would like to share with you a more historical perspective regarding the Israeli policy, how to deal with situations of POWs, hostages. Abductions, hijackings by terrorist organizations, it's a global problem, and I believe that my colleague can tell you a lot about it. But according to my studies, Israel is unique. And I would like to explain why Israel is acting a different way historically when it has to deal with hostages. So first of all, we can find the roots in our religion. The commitment to release abducted Jews, to save hostages, is part of the Judaism. And the time is short to discuss it in deep, but it's one of the roots of the Israeli policy. But it's not just the religious source, it's both the values of the Israeli society since the establishment of the State of Israel, and it's a key value of the IDF. And I'm not going to explain it because I think that General Gallant did it very well a few minutes ago. So the way that we are looking at the challenge of hostages has deep roots in the values of the Israeli society. Combine it with the religion aspects, and you can understand that the way that Israel has to treat this problem is very different from all other countries around the world. So this is one point. The second point that I would like to relate is that, unfortunately, from the establishment of the country, and even earlier, Israel all the time has to deal with problems of POWs and hostages. The War of Independence was quite unique because this was the only war that at the end we have more civilians considered as POWs in the Arab countries than soldiers. It happened because Arab countries occupied the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, the Gush Etzion enclave south of Jerusalem, Nitzanim, and so on. This was the only time before the current war that women were in Arab prison. So, for instance, in Jordan, we had 83 women that were considered POWs, in Egypt 7. But anyway, at the end of the War of Independence, all of the POWs were released as a part of the ceasefire agreements with the different Arab states. And this procedure followed in the next wars of Israel, and unfortunately, Israel had a lot. So, if I will give you an example of the Sinai War, in Sinai War, Israel had one pilot as a POW in Egypt. Israel had more than 5,000 Egyptian soldiers, including what at that time were the first Palestinian terrorists, the Fadayun that were captured in Gaza Strip. And they had also 3 other Israelis that were captured before the war. But Israel had no problem, no political debate, no public debate to exchange 4 Israelis for 5,000 Egyptians and Palestinians. I mention this because it followed in the next wars as well. So the disproportionate figures that I think that are relevant only to Israel started not with exchange of hostages with terror organization, but in prisoner of war exchanges with Arab countries. Just to complete it, after some of the wars, for instance, the Yom Kippur War, Israel released as well Palestinian terrorists that were imprisoned in exchange of a Mossad agent that was in the prison in Egypt, and it was part of the deal. Now I would like to move from this point to the problem of hostages taking by terror organizations. The PLO, the Fatah, and many other groups were founded in 1964 or 1968, and this was the starting point of terror abductions of Israelis. Along all the history of Israel, if I have to summarize it briefly, the Israeli policy, no matter who was the prime minister or which party was in power, was if it's possible to release hostages by using military force, this was the preferred option. If it was not possible for certain reasons, then Israel negotiated. And Israel was ready almost always to pay higher price for our hostages. Only once in our history we exchanged one for one. It was the abducted civilian Shmuel Rosenwasser in 1970 that was exchanged for one Palestinian terrorist that was actually a symbol of the Fatah. He conducted the first terror attack of the Fatah, so it was one for one. But since then, always Israel was ready to pay more.
Bring another one. Samir Assad, the Jews, was exchanged for one.
Oh, it's a different situation.
Okay.
We don't have the time to go into the details.
I was proud to be part of
Yeah.
it.
Now, I think that we have to divide it into two periods. The first one, let's say from 64 till the mid of the 80s, the dominant players were the Fatah and all the secular Palestinian organizations. And the second period that started with the foundation of the Hezbollah, that actually started to use abductions as a strategy not against Israel, it was against actually Americans and other foreign citizens in Beirut and elsewhere. And then in 1987, with the foundation of the Hamas, they joined the same track. So from then onwards, Israel had to deal with this phenomenon, with challenges from local terror abduction to hijacking to Entebbe, and the same policy that I mentioned before was relevant. Now, to meet the time, I would like just to conclude it with some points regarding the current situation. Along all the history of negotiations between Israel and different terror organizations to release hostages, the demand was exchange of hostages with terrorists in Israeli prisons. One exception. This exception was in 1973, September. It was called the Shenau Affair. That in this case, the demand of the terrorists of the Saika that hijacked a train with Russian Jews immigrating to Israel through Austria, the demand was to stop the immigration through Austria. But since then, all the negotiations were about exchange of prisoners. The current situation that we are dealing since the 7th of October is that this is the second time that the demand is a combination of release of terrorists from the prison, but as well strategic demands to end the war, to withdraw the idea from the Gaza Strip, to permit humanitarian aid, to rebuild Gaza, and so on. So this is a new phenomenon that the government and the IDF and all the agencies has to deal with this challenging new type of demand. The second thing is that in all previous occasions, it was between wars, and exchange was afterwards as a part of the ceasefire agreement. Here, all the negotiations are going on during war. And again, it makes it much more challenging than ever before. And to make it even more complex, because it's a multi-front war with 7 fronts, each decision taken regarding the Gaza front has effects on the whole situation. And again, the decision makers has to take it in consideration when they take the decision how to deal with this challenge.
Thank you, and that actually, I think, sets up nicely what I suspect Ariel is going to address. I mentioned earlier that Ariel and I have been friends for half a century. We've done a number of things together, and I do recall, as he's about to speak. I'm, by the way, in addition to friendship, I'm an enormous fan of Ariel's scholarship and his actually intellectual integrity and forthrightness in dealing with difficult problems. Ariel and I were together in 1980 at the Council of Europe meeting on terrorism in Strasbourg. And he was an invited delegate from Israel. I was a consultant to the Italian senator that was the director of the Council of Europe's efforts on counterterrorism. I had never been in the Council of Europe before, and I have to admit that I was completely dazzled by the eloquence of the speakers. I think Ariel was more impressed by their hypocrisy. I do recall at one point in the discussions, a French delegate got up and began his speech, "Moi, je suis un Cartésien." Me, I am a Cartesian. I was unaware that the 17th century French philosopher Descartes had written much about terrorism, but nonetheless, I thought it was very cool. Ariel is not likely to quote 17th century French philosophers or claim Cartesian aspects, although I did look it up, and Descartes, part of Cartesian meant Descartes' methods, which were rigorous analysis. And so I suspect that is what we're going to hear from him. Ariel, it would be easier to use the podium, so you take it from there, and then that will really be the lead-in to our remaining focus of our discussion, which is going to be exclusively on dealing with the very difficult situation in Hamas.
Okay, well, does this work? I'm not sure. Is it okay? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Brian. It's always a great pleasure to participate with you and in terrorism panels. We've done it quite often, I think, over the years. And it's always a pleasure. I beg your pardon. Actually, I apologize for preparing a written presentation, simply because I wasn't certain that I would be able to say precisely what I want to say in a speech that comes spontaneously. Now, I apologize for the length of the presentation. It's going to be 15 minutes. I hope not more than that. And I think what I have to say will be quite different of what my colleagues here chose to speak about. I feel that in this country and at this time, it is very difficult to discuss the issue of negotiations over hostages in a detached, logical manner. This is an extremely emotional subject. Naturally, people's starting point is emotional when talking about the situation now that we are facing in Israel. Identification with the suffering of the hostages and their families. This is something that we cannot just not focus on, I think, in this panel, at this time, in this country. And that is what I'm going to talk about. This is deeply a human response, I think, to be emotional about the subject of hostages here. But paradoxically, I must say, it does not always, the emotional approach does not always serve the hostages' interests. Nevertheless, despite the strong emotions, I'll try to address this issue in a balanced and rational way. The negotiations Israel is conducting with Hamas for the release of hostages in the Gaza Strip are unprecedented worldwide. We have heard here about the history of negotiations here and elsewhere, but now this is a completely unprecedented situation. Shaul Shay kind of touched upon this point, but I'd like to expand it a bit. Now, I know of no case in which negotiations were conducted for the return of prisoners or hostages in the midst of war, when one of the main declared objectives of that war, indeed the primary objective, was the release of those very captives, those very hostages. It is impossible to discuss negotiations over the hostages in isolation from the broader policy regarding the war in Gaza. Regardless of the professionalism of the negotiation team, what ultimately determines whether there will be a deal is the policy of the government of Israel. good as they may be, and I'm sure all of them are very good people, the generals and head of Mossad and all the other professionals that are part of the negotiation team are doing the mechanics, the tactics, but the decisions that really influence the end result of the negotiations are taken by the government. Everything else is minor, relatively unimportant. The two declared objectives of Israel's war are, first, the return of the hostages, and second, the elimination of Hamas as a governing authority in Gaza. But the real goal of the present government is the conquest of Gaza, the expulsion of as many Palestinians as possible, and the establishment of Jewish settlements there. Eliminating Hamas as a governing authority, which is one of the two main declared goals of the war by the government. This can be achieved, the elimination of Hamas as the ruler of Gaza can be achieved in either one of two ways. First, conquering Gaza and holding it indefinitely under Israeli military occupation, or, alternatively, handing Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority, which would rule with the support of Arab forces hostile to Hamas. These are the only two possibilities, I argue, to remove Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip. Logically, the first option, conquering Gaza, is destructive to Israel's interest because of the cost in Israeli soldiers' lives, the economic burden of rebuilding and maintaining Gaza, and the immense strategic and economic damage to Israel's global standing. Yet, under the pressure of delusional messianic forces now dictating Israel's policy, this is the path the government is actually pursuing, and this is the context within which we must discuss the hostage issue now. On October 7, 2023, Hamas and its partner organizations abducted 251 Israeli and foreign persons, including corpses. Every decent person empathizes with the suffering of the hostages and their families. Yet in the broader context, the hostage issue is one part of the tragedy, but not the whole. The media and protests constantly cry out for the hostages, and indeed 41 hostages have been killed in captivity. And the suffering of the 20 still held alive by Hamas is terrible. Yet since the beginning of the ground campaign, 460 IDF soldiers have been killed in Gaza. In June alone, 20 IDF soldiers, equal to the number of hostages still alive, were killed there. And the international political and strategic damage from the ongoing war poses in the long term an existential threat to Israel's future. Now, let's say something about public opinion on the hostage issue. In October 2023, just in the beginning of the war, Israel Democracy Institute survey showed that only 9% of Jewish respondents supported immediate negotiations with Hamas for the hostages release. Just 9%. Even if this required halting the fighting there. I mean, everybody is for negotiations, but the question was, do you support negotiations with Hamas? even if this requires halting the war in Gaza. As the war dragged on, however, support grew for freeing the hostages, even at the cost of stopping the war. In August 2025, about 2/3 of the Jewish public supported a deal under which all hostages would be freed, fighting would cease, and the IDF would withdraw from Gaza. This is apparently the current picture. 2/3 of the public, according to several public opinion polls, supports getting a deal with Hamas as part of stopping the war and actually agreeing to a large degree with Hamas requirements. It can be assumed that this change in public opinion was heavily influenced by the war dragging on for 2 years without decisively defeating Hamas or ousting it from power in Gaza. A large part of the public was disappointed by the army's inability to achieve victory by military means and felt that under these circumstances it was preferable to free the hostages and end the war. Public opinion has also been influenced by the relentless campaign of the hostage families. The hostage families campaign has been quite effective, no doubt, in changing public opinion. Now it's, I think, important to look at Hamas motives if we want to see the whole picture of the situation of the hostages and the war. In discussing the hostage issue, it is important to understand Hamas motives for the factors and the factors shaping its behavior. 3 questions must be answered. 1, why did Hamas go to the trouble of kidnapping so many people and holding them? 2, what shapes Hamas' conduct in the negotiations? And 3, what led Hamas to agree to release hostages in the partial deals after October 7? So what was the goal of the abductions? Unlike previous abductions, whose main purpose was to free imprisoned militants and strengthen their status among supporters, this time the main goal of Hamas was and remains preventing the IDF from conquering Gaza and toppling Hamas rule. Knowing Israel's extreme sensitivity to hostages, Hamas leaders believed that abducting many civilians and threatening their safety could deter an Israeli invasion, or at least halt Israel's military operation as a condition for their release. The hostages were meant to serve as a human shield. That was the central goal from the outset. Releasing Hamas prisoners was only a bonus. And that is the situation now. It's quite different from every previous case of hostage taking, here and elsewhere in the world. Now, what shapes Hamas' conduct in negotiations? I think this is a very important point. Hamas' positions in negotiations are dictated by its assessment of its chances of surviving the Israeli assault. The factor pushing toward compromise and faster negotiations is the intensity of Israeli military pressure. The claim that military threat does not affect Hamas is baseless. Hamas wouldn't go into any agreement that includes release of prisoners had it not been for the threat posed to him by the IDF assault in Gaza. Hamas agreed to release hostages only because of military threat and its fear that this might end its rule in Gaza. No humanitarian considerations, not even concern for its own prisoners in Israeli jails, played a role. The factor pushing Hamas toward hardening its stance is the assessment that Israel cannot sustain high-intensity warfare for long because of internal and international demands to end the war. What led Hamas to release hostages in partial deals? Unlike earlier hostage cases, where the terrorist group was not under existential threat during negotiations, for instance, in the case of Gilad Shalit, who was held for over 5 years, while negotiations dragged on. After October 7, Hamas came under constant Israeli assault, suffering daily losses. In the first weeks after the IDF entered Gaza, fighting was intense, causing Hamas severe losses in fighters, leadership, and infrastructure. The intensity of Israel's assault caused panic among Hamas leaders, who feared conquest of Gaza and the group's collapse. Domestic pressure in Israel to free hostages at any price was still relatively low. I'm talking about October 2023. It was the beginning. Under these conditions, Hamas agreed to a quick deal that gave it a breathing space. The deal was carried out only about 3 weeks after the ground campaign began. In November 2023, 105 hostages were freed. In exchange, there was a 1-week ceasefire. 210 Palestinian prisoners were released, about 3 per Israeli hostages, and fuel and humanitarian aid were allowed into Gaza. What drove Hamas to accept such favorable terms for Israel was the shock of massive Israeli pressure early in the ground campaign, coupled with hope that the ceasefire would extend into a permanent arrangement. But as the war dragged on, fighting intensity declined, and the IDF became bogged down, and Hamas recovered from its initial shock despite continued loss of commanders in targeted strikes. This recovery was reflected in raising its demands for further hostage releases. Additional factors bolstering Hamas' confidence were growing public pressure in Israel to free hostages at any cost, and rising international pressure on Israel to end the war. Hamas' hardened stance reflected in releasing fewer hostages and for more prisoners was apparently based on its hope that Israeli public pressure would force the government to accept deals more favorable to Hamas, which indeed happened. More than a year passed before the next deal, from 19 January to 26 February 2025, this year. This deal freed 33 hostages alive and returned 8 corpses. In exchange, 737 Palestinian prisoners were released, including 200 serving life sentences. This was the last deal to date. Returning to the Israeli government's conduct. In parallel with Hamas' hardening stance, the Israeli government deliberately torpedoed potential agreements by introducing new demands, such as continued control of the Philadelphia route during a ceasefire in September 2024, and later continued control of the Morag route, July 2025. These new demands were raised with agreements when agreements were close to fruition. The recent cancellation by the Israeli government of a deal near completion, which included the release of 10 living hostages and 18 bodies, in favor of intensifying the war at great probable cost is in hostage lives, Israeli soldiers' lives, Palestinian civilians' lives, and Israel's international standing. This clearly indicates that the current government is guided by motivations other than the best interests of the country and its citizens. In conclusion, In the unprecedented situation of the war in Gaza, the hostage issue cannot be dealt with in isolation. It is an integral part of a situation in which Israeli government policy has resulted in unnecessary continuation of the war at huge cost in hostages' lives, dead and wounded Israeli soldiers, Palestinian civilians, and far-reaching damage to Israel's legitimacy and political and economic standing in the world. The tragedy is that the war could have ended soon after it began by handing over the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, aided by forces from moderate Arab countries. Quite likely, the Palestinian Authority, with its long record of blood feuds with Hamas, could, with external aid, have dealt effectively with Hamas, as it has done in the West Bank. However, the Israeli government, whose guiding principle before the war regarded the Palestinian Authority as a danger and Hamas as an asset, failed to do so then and is unlikely to do so now. This is bad news for the hostages and for us all. Thank you.
Okay. I knew that was coming. and you have laid it out. It is, let me ask the members of the panel, we're going to go right down the line here in terms of reactions to that or any of the other things that I've mentioned thus far, and specifically focusing on the Hamas issue now. That's going to be. By the way, it's 6:15. We are entitled to go to 6:45, and so we've got a half an hour. We started a little bit late. I'm willing to run a little bit late to make up for that time. So we shall see if they let us do that. So, Gersh?
Military pressure has killed hostages. Military pressure has not brought back the hostages. I started talking to Hamas on October 10th about releasing the women, the children, the elderly, the wounded, and the sick. I found out on October 10th, the number of Palestinian women prisoners, which was 59 if I remember correctly, and the number of minors under the age of 18 who were in Israeli prison, if I remember correctly, it was 190. None of them were from Gaza. None of them were important Hamas people. None of them had killed Israelis. In other words, a deal for releasing women and children at least was on the table. As soon as the emergency government was created and Gantz and Eisenkot were brought into the government, I communicated with them the number of prisoners that we're talking about, of women and minors, and the number of hostages being held by Hamas. Hamas, from what I understood, had no intention of taking women and children hostages. It happened. It was way beyond what they planned for. In fact, they never expected for the Israeli army not to be at the border. One of the Hamas people told me, if we knew there was no army there, we would have sent 10,000 Nukhba soldiers and we would have conquered Tel Aviv. And they might have. But they were not set up logistically to deal with women and children. I think that we could have gotten a deal for all the elderly, the sick, and the wounded as well. I was sitting with an Egyptian intelligence officer on the day that the Egyptians received a list of the Israeli hostages that Hamas was ready to release. It was the same day that the Israeli army announced that they surrounded the city of Gaza. I think we're doing that again. At that moment, Hamas froze the deal, and the military pressure when the Israeli army went into Shifa Hospital and into the center of Gaza City, postponed the first deal by at least 3 weeks. There's a deal on the table now that takes into account Israeli defense needs. Hamas is willing to step down from governing Gaza. They have been for more than a year. There are 2 alternative governments ready to be established in Gaza, technocratic, non-Hamas governments, not the Palestinian Authority, as part of the deal. The Americans are willing to give guarantees, significant guarantees to Hamas, that the war will not renew once they release hostages. And there are different guarantees. I won't go into the details. They were presented to Hamas last Monday night. The deal can be made. But right now, where we are at this moment, is that Trump could go either way. And right now, he's gone the way of telling Israel, do what you need to do. Because Trump is waiting to hear from Hamas that they're willing to make the deal now. The Tuesday assassination attempt put Hamas into paralysis. It also questions whether or not the Qataris are going to play the role that they should, or whether or not the weight is going to move over to the Egyptians. The Egyptians are very involved as well. Hamas, as an organization controlling Gaza, is finished, and they know it. People in Hamas told me that their people are holding guns to protect themselves from Gazans, not from Israelis. Hamas has no support on the streets of Gaza today. They can continue to kill Israeli soldiers as long as Israeli soldiers are in Gaza. And they will do that. We have a guerrilla warfare going on, but Hamas poses zero military strategic threat to the state of Israel. And anyone who tells you that we're staying in Gaza to prevent another October 7th is lying. There's no other way of saying it. They are lying. Hamas is not a military threat to Israel. Hamas agrees to a security perimeter in Gaza that will be a no-entry zone of 500 meters to 1 kilometer wide along the entire Gaza Strip, as long as there won't be any Israeli soldiers there. But they agree that this perimeter will be kept for as long as necessary. There are all kinds of security arrangements that can be made, that are ready to be made. What we need to happen is for President Trump to do it. My proposal to President Trump is that he make a proclamation that the war is over and that he put an agreement on the table, which is already drafted, between Israel and Hamas, and tells them that they have a week to sign it. That's the only way this is going to end. The Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu cannot be given a choice, because what's happening in Gaza now is not only destroying Gaza, it's destroying the state of Israel. It's destroying us. When he talked about Sparta, he was not making it up. What he didn't tell us is that Sparta lost. And that's where we are today if we don't end the war and bring the hostages home.
Avi?
Well, following Gershon's comments, it would be pretty hard to challenge, but I'll do my best anyways. And I totally understand his emotions, as we as Israelis obviously observed during those rush times. I would like to comment on some of, I would say, the evolution of the process that started with the trauma. After, as Gershon described well, the October 7th really shocked us, and obviously the situation that got into I would say, the Gaza envelope pretty fast during those days was really a shock for us with the abduction of hundreds of our people. But as Gershon said, it was from Hamas' side kind of a miscalculation that caused to the trauma, obviously, and definitely not justifying it, just saying that the situation was so catastrophic that it really caused devastating results on the Israeli side. But on the other hand, we can say that once the process has started, so unlike some of the understanding in the Israeli public, Hamas was quite stable with regard to his, I would say, demands when it comes to the negotiation. Obviously, he hardened some of it and is not an easy client to deal with. Obviously, it has its jihadistic morals aspects. He has his obviously anti-Semitic or obviously looking for the demolition of the state of Israel. But setting aside all those aspects, Hamas was quite stable about his demands to end the war, to release most, at least it was at first, most of the hostages, and later on all of the hostages, as Gershon just mentioned now. And that, I would say, understanding was not getting into deep roots of the Israeli establishment, because at all times during the war, at least until now, the Israeli establishment was pretty motivated by getting the agenda for the military campaign in Gaza, which obviously had been justified and was for the first months or even the first year was quite justified. And as we can see, Israel is losing ground currently in the international community. And hence the military campaign as well is becoming less effective. That's first. And second of all, the way that Hamas has adjusted itself to the war and from a military organization well funded and well trained has become a guerrilla organization has also reduced the opportunities to get genuine achievements in the battlefield. Having said all that, what I wanted to say for the final remarks is that the military campaign at the end won't bring the hostages by itself. It can be the external impact of this negotiation at all times, and that obviously brought some achievements into negotiation, but at the end, dealing directly with Hamas, with the issue of the hostages, is something that needs to be dealt in more specific matters and more specific objectives that are set forth when it comes to a negotiation. So when we're concluding all those aspects, I believe at the end, there is currently a deal that is quite, I would say, effective, that has been transparent to both sides, and they actually conclude all the prices that have been discussed during last year. So unlike under negotiations that starting from zero and we need time to build trust and get a negotiation and get the details done, I think we're quite done with the understandings that this negotiation comes to an end and needs to be ended soon with the release of all hostages and the end of war.
Thank you. Shaul?
I'd like to relate to Hamas from a different perspective. Of course, naturally, we are concentrating now on the war between Israel and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And I'm not going into the debate, the political debate, what is the solution at the end of this war in the Gaza Strip. But we have to take in consideration that Hamas is in Gaza. Hamas is in the West Bank. We are fighting the Hamas in a different type of war daily and nightly in the West Bank. And Hamas is abroad. And to add to it, if I look at the situation from the regional perspective, when we look at the region, you know, it's a kind of balance of power. When the axis of resistance of Iran became weaker, the alliance of Turkey, Qatar, Muslim Brotherhood is on the rise. So when you look only at the Gaza Strip, you can get only a partial picture about the challenges of Israel dealing with the Hamas. And it's necessary to take it into consideration in the long run. I mentioned it just in one sentence, that always we have to look at the overall picture and not just to the current most painful problems that we have to discuss.
I wish I could offer something that would be more brilliant than the things that you have all said, even though there's been a tension between it. And I'm not. I think if someone had an easy solution to this, I think we would have come up with it by now. War is always a really messy topic. In fact, I was talking to a young person who's going to Reichman University, and I hate to sound like I just graduated from the War College, because I did like 20 years ago, because I'm an old man now. But I commended to him Thucydides, the Peloponnesian Wars, because every time I open that book, I'm like, yep, this stuff is happening even today. And I'm mindful of coalition warfare. I'm mindful of maybe the desired end state. And I would say, And I would never even think of offering any advice to this current government or really countering anything that was set up here. And I look at Lior, we've had some good conversations about this topic too. I would simply say that the best way to progress from where we are right now is to take a hard look at where you want Israel to be in 10 years from now, your desired end state, and start building back from there to determine what you have to do in the next probably 12 months to put yourself where you want to be 10 years from now. And by the way, that will change in 6 months, and that will change in 12 months. But if you don't actually say your desired end state 10 years from now is an Israel with, and fill in the blanks. It could be regional support, friendships with Saudi Arabia, trade relationships with Europe, a healing of the fractured society of Israel, a healing of the soul of the country. If you say that's where you want to be, that's going to give you a better path of where you want to go. But I think when I take a look at a problem like right there before me, sometimes I can't see what the solution is because I'm dealing with that stuff right there. Again, maybe just to repeat it a third time, project out 10 years. What do you want this country to look like? What do you want your relationships with other countries to be like? What do you want your relationship to your government, your military, and the soul of this country, whether that's cultural, spiritual, religious, fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank. And that's going to tell you how to progress. And maybe that's kind of a cowardly way of answering it because I've absolutely stayed from saying anything political. At the same time, what I offer is from my heart because when I look at the chess pieces or the Lego set before me, I don't see a solution. When I look 10 years from now, things start becoming a little more clear to me.
Thank you. Ariel, I know you want to make some comments back, and as I say, we're going to continue this debate. I really see myself now simply as a moderator, but I want to add one comment. Suppose the military offensive, this is hypothetical, suppose the military offensive continues with, let's say, growing Israeli IDF casualties as they push further into the city, which probably can be anticipated. And suppose, whether as a consequence of that or whether just as a casualty of the intense fighting, a situation occurs where the remaining hostages are all killed. What does that do for the future of Israeli society? If that is the ultimate outcome, is that they are all killed, when many here believe that there is some sort of a solution that would have an opportunity to get some of them back. But you have a number of comments to respond to, so the floor is yours. You're on.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I'll first address your question, Brian, and then I'll say something about Gershon's comments. I'm sorry that, well, first of all, it will be, okay, thanks. It will be, I think, a terrible shock, at least for a while, for Israeli society, if Hamas or IDF bombings kill all hostages at 10 or all of them 20 living hostages. But let me mention the fact that of the 251 hostages and corpses, living hostages and corpses, originally taken by Hamas on October 7, 41 have already been killed in captivity by Hamas. So the number of living hostages now held by Hamas is half of the number of those who had already been killed by Hamas in the course of these 2 years. Well, we know what was the response of Israeli society to the killing of hostages by Hamas. It was a shock for a while. I don't think it's going to break Israeli societies or to affect it politically, I think, in a far-reaching way. It will have an effect, but not a far-reaching effect. I think, again, we have to see the Israeli public reaction. You know, the hostages are a symbol. They are a symbol for the resentment, the broad resentment of a very large section, the majority of the Israeli people. Resentment felt by the Israeli people of government policy in general. Not only in the hostage, in the policy concerning hostages, but the continuation of the war, the losing of Israel's legitimacy in the world, and all that. The hostages are a symbol. So I don't think that the count of dead hostages in itself is the single most important factor affecting Israeli sentiments. I think it's the whole situation as a whole. As to your point, Gershon, I think you are too benevolent. You're for presenting Hamas in a too benevolent way.
No one knows them better than me, and I have nothing good to say about them.
Well, okay, it doesn't seem this way hearing your comment lately. Now, anyway, what I want to mention in relation to your points is that Hamas is still a danger. You present it as if it were, a whole devastated organization. Hamas is still recruiting, and that's at least what Israeli intelligence is telling us. Hamas is still recruiting people. They used the 60-day, the 42-day break for recuperating, for reorganizing, etc. That's natural, that's understandable. If you look at Khalil Shkaki's public opinion polls, the last one I've seen, I don't think that he published already, is September. He's supposed to publish one in September. The last one, I think, was in June, a few months ago, 3 months ago. And do you know how many, if you ask Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, how do you feel about October 7th? Was it justified, Hamas attack? Do you justify Hamas attack on Israel? What do you think the Palestinian public say? In the West Bank, more than 50% say, bravo Hamas. It was a good thing you did. In the Gaza Strip, devastated as it is.
Not anymore. That's not accurate today.
Wait a minute. Devastated as it is, 37% still say bravo Hamas. Hamas is still a danger to Israel. And I think it's not as nice as you present it.
Ariel, I didn't...
Let me finish then you'll have your turn. I think the best way to diffuse Hamas danger is to get in the Palestinian Authority. no technician's government can survive Hamas pressure. And Hamas, despite of its willingness, formal, overt willingness to have, a kind of technician's government, still insists on having its arms, its weapons. Okay, it's still a danger. Don't take it lightly.
I just have to comment that I didn't say that Hamas was not dangerous. I said that Hamas is not an existential threat to Israel. There is no danger of another October 7th from Hamas. I'm not saying that Hamas is not dangerous. I will say that the only way, and I think you agree with me, of defeating Hamas is politically and diplomatically, and not only militarily. There must be a political diplomatic solution for Gaza and for the Palestinian question. There are also solutions that Hamas has already been talked to about by the Egyptians and the Qataris on the issue of disarmament. And there are potential solutions that have been talked about, and Hamas is willing to engage in those discussions. With regard to public opinion polling, Khalil Shakaki will be the first one to tell you that his polls are not accurate. There was even documentation found by the IDF that his polls in Gaza were slanted intentionally. From what I hear in Gaza, and I talk to people in Gaza every single day, it's not scientific, but I think you have trouble finding people in Gaza who support Hamas today. Most Gazans want Hamas gone, and they never want to see them again. Most Palestinians in the West Bank as well today, the support for Hamas is on a sharp decline, accuse Hamas of committing national collective suicide of the Palestinian people on October 7th without asking the Palestinian people if they were willing to die or be destroyed by Israel. No one could have foreseen the amount of destruction that Israel has done in Gaza, and there isn't a person who's not living through that today who doesn't blame Hamas at least for half the responsibility of what's happening in the Gaza Strip today.
Let me interrupt here with just a question of fact. By the way, I'm mindful of time when we're in our last 5 minutes. I want to, with all of you here to inform me, did you indicate that it was not part of the plan for Hamas to take the women and children hostage, that was a spontaneous event, or was that directed?
What I said is this is what Hamas people said to me. Now, you don't have to believe them.
Okay.
But this is what they said to me, that it was not part of their intentional plan to take women and children. Those people who understand Islam know that it's also against Islam to take women and children as hostages. Not that Hamas is the great example of what Islam is, but within their own theology, it's not part of what they plan to do according to them. And it's obvious to me that from October 10th, they were very anxious to talk about a deal to release all the women and children. They were not set up logistically to deal with them, and they didn't want the headache of dealing with women and children hostages. And that deal could have been made a week later.
No, I would certainly agree with the point that the women, in fact, Roger and I discussed this at a dinner the night of October 10th, and I said, they will want to shed the women and children faster than the others because that is a diminishing asset, difficult to take care of. However, I am really stretched to accept the notion that the abduction of women and children was accidental or was...
No, it wasn't accidental, but you have to remember that a lot more people crossed the border on October 7th than just the Hamas Nukhba soldiers. There were thousands of people who crossed the border that day who killed and raped and burned and took hostages, including dead bodies as hostages, not only Hamas.
All right, thank you.
Women and children was in the orders, the Nukhba commanders got from Hamas leadership, period.
In the interest of time, because we only have a couple of minutes here, Avi, Shaul, last words.
Yeah, I would just say two comments. First of all, about Hamas with regard to October 7th. We need to understand, as Gershon said, the population is invaded also to Israel, and this is and due to the barbaric actions taken by Palestinians. This is another, I would say, substantial example of the indoctrination of the Palestinian population against Israel for the last at least generation in Gaza, ever since Hamas have taken the role in Gaza and even before, obviously, we know. So that's one of the, I would say, genuine problems when discussing about future solving of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that's why I believe, at least, and I believe most of the Israeli consensus is now in this area where the two-state solution currently is totally irrelevant, because the Palestinian society cannot handle the state. It is too heavily indoctrinated against Israel, anti-Semitic and other aspects that we don't have time to share with, but definitely it's not enough developed to take the lead for a territory that is so close and so nearby and can set, by the way, as a state, an existential threat on Israel. So that's about it. And the other comment, the last one, Brian, from my end, is about the moral grounds that mentioned here earlier, and you have asked about it. While you mentioned about the possible disaster, obviously, that we are obviously definitely wouldn't like to see about hostages getting killed during this military campaign or even later. Will be, if a disaster like that will happen, this will definitely traumatize the Israeli society. The moral grounds, the Jewish religion grounds, even the legal aspects of it will be so heavily that it will set a burden for the society to thrive later on, and it will set further another bad angle for the development of the state of Israel when we're looking forward for a prosperous state, a Western democratic state that we all wish to live in.
With the People's Army.
With the People's Army, correct. Thank you.
Shaul.
I hope that your scenario will never happen. And I would like to remind you that the release of the hostages is still one of the top goals of the IDF in this maneuver. So I believe that the IDF will do almost everything possible, at least to release all the hostages that it will be possible to release. And anyway, you have to take in consideration that the Israeli people are strong. So we will manage with any situation, but I'm more optimistic than your scenario. I believe that at least a big part of the hostages will return home.
All right, thank you. Roger, last word, very quick.
To be the contrarian again, my last word, this thing does not work, does it? Anyway. My last word is, you'll notice I took a lot of notes. I do this for a living. I did it for a living. I taught it at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So this is my world, and yet I took notes because we are sitting among some incredible experts, and I'm sure they fired a lot of thoughts in your minds. You all certainly did mine. So my last thought, Brian, is nothing other than to say thank you for the honor of being on this stage with these experts, and thank you for this discussion that you led today, and I appreciate that Reichman University supporting this, and Lior with your chair supporting this discussion today. And for you all, I know you're probably supposed to say this, right, Brian? And for you all for engaging in this and paying attention today. So thank you.
No, I want to. It has been a learning experience for me. You know, in listening to a problem like this, and listening to this, I tell people I have been studying terrorism for 50 years. Give me another 50 years, I'll have it all sorted out. I'm less optimistic about that now, but what we have heard, and I appreciate my colleagues on the panel here, we have heard what I really wanted was not political speeches, not propaganda, not political agendas, but really candid expressions, objectively reached, and I think we have had that. And for that, I do thank my fellow colleagues, and I thank all of you for being here as participants in this. I don't know how long the war will go on. I don't know what will be the fate of the hostages. I'm not recognized in the field of prophecy, but I probably can say that whatever happens, terrorism, terrorist tactics will remain a danger. I believe that that threat has evolved. I think right now in the world situation, it is a greater danger now than it has been recently. It's much more complex, much more fragmented, and that we will, sadly, see more hostage situations, whether they will replicate the situation of Hamas or whether that's a unique situation, but we will see different hostage situations. That, I think, is a virtual guarantee. So none of you will be free from this subject going forward. Again, my thanks to all of you. My thanks to all of you.